The bullet missed her head by 3 inches, shattering the window behind her instead, and Flora Kincaid knew with cold certainty that her husband would not miss the next time. She ran into the Wyoming night without a coat, without money, without anything except the terror that propelled her legs forward through the darkness. Behind her, Thomas Kincaid's drunken roars echoed from their homestead on the outskirts of Laramie, promising death if he caught her. Flora's lungs burned as she stumbled through sagebrush and over rocks, her thin cotton dress catching on thorns. Blood ran warm down her arms where he had grabbed her, his fingers leaving fresh bruises atop old ones that never quite had time to heal. The year was 1876, and women had few choices when it came to escaping violent husbands. Flora had learned that lesson 3 years ago when she married Thomas, believing his promises of a good life out west. Instead, she found herself trapped in a cycle of cruelty that grew worse with each passing month. Tonight, when he had loaded his pistol with shaking, whiskey-soaked hands and told her he was finished dealing with her disobedience, something inside her finally broke free. She ran toward the mountains, toward the wild country where Thomas would not follow in the dark. The September air bit through her dress, but fear kept her moving even as her bare feet left bloody prints on the rocky ground. Behind her, she heard him firing shots into the air, howling her name like a rabid animal. Flora did not look back. The terrain grew rougher as she climbed, leaving the sparse vegetation of the plains behind. Pine trees loomed in the darkness, their branches blocking out the stars. Flora's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she pushed forward, knowing that stopping meant death. Her foot caught on an exposed root and she went down hard, crying out as her hands scraped across stone. For a moment, she lay there gasping, tears mixing with dirt on her face. Then she heard it, the sound of a horse approaching from a different direction than Thomas's angry bellowing. Flora scrambled behind a boulder, pressing herself into the shadows. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The horse came closer, its rider moving with careful deliberation through the darkness. "Easy now," a deep voice murmured, speaking to the horse. "Something spooked you, did it?" Flora held her breath, praying whoever it was would pass by. But the horse stopped near her hiding spot, snorting and stamping. She heard the creak of leather as the rider dismounted. "I know someone's there," the voice said, gentler now. "I am not looking to harm you, but these mountains are dangerous at night and I heard gunshots." Flora stayed silent, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. In the 3 years since marrying Thomas, she had learned that men's kind words meant nothing. They could speak softly one moment and strike you senseless the next. "Miss, I can hear you breathing. If you are in trouble, I can help. If you are not, I will leave you be. But at least let me know you are not injured." Something in his tone made Flora peek around the boulder. The man stood about 20 feet away, his horse's reins loose in his hand. Even in the darkness, she could tell he was massive, well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to span half the width of his horse. Long hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He did not move toward her, just stood waiting with surprising patience for such a large man. "I am injured," Flora finally whispered, her voice cracking, "but not in the way you mean." The man turned slightly, and moonlight caught his face. His eyes were kind, she realized with shock. After so long seeing nothing but rage and cruelty in Thomas's gaze, this stranger's expression made something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. "Are you running from someone?" he asked. Flora nodded, then realized he might not see the gesture. "My husband. He tried to kill me tonight." "He has been." She could not finish the sentence. The stranger was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My name is Zachariah Larkin. I live about 5 miles up the mountain. I am headed home now. You are welcome to come with me, get cleaned up, and decide what you want to do come morning. Or I can take you into Laramie to the sheriff, though that is a longer ride." "No sheriff," Flora said quickly. She had gone to the law once after Thomas had broken her arm. The sheriff had told her that what happened between a man and his wife was not his concern, and maybe if she was a better wife, her husband would not need to discipline her. "Please, not the sheriff." Zachariah's jaw tightened, and Flora saw anger flash across his face, though she instinctively knew it was not directed at her. "Then you will come with me. Can you walk, or are you hurt too badly?" Flora forced herself to stand, biting back a whimper as pain shot through her scraped feet and bruised body. Her legs nearly gave out, and suddenly Zachariah was there, his large hand steadying her elbow with a touch so light she barely felt it. She flinched anyway, unable to help herself. He released her immediately, stepping back. "I am sorry, I should have asked. May I help you onto my horse? You cannot walk 5 miles in your condition." The careful way he asked permission for everything, the way he had stepped back the moment she showed fear, it confused Flora. She nodded slowly, not quite trusting this strange gentleness, but too exhausted and hurt to refuse help. Zachariah moved with surprising grace for such a big man, lifting her onto his horse with hands that barely seemed to exert pressure, as if she were made of something fragile that might shatter. Flora settled into the saddle, swaying slightly, and he swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, and she stiffened, waiting for that grip to tighten, for those fingers to dig into her flesh, but they did not. His arm stayed loose, just enough contact to keep her steady as the horse began to climb. Flora had never felt anything like it. Thomas's every touch had been harsh, demanding, painful. This man held her as if she might break, and the foreign sensation made tears spring to her eyes. They rode in silence through the dark forest. Behind them, Thomas's shouts had faded into the distance. Flora realized he had probably passed out drunk or given up the chase. She trembled, thinking about what would happen if he found her. He would kill her for certain this time. "You are safe now," Zachariah said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "No one comes up to my cabin without me knowing about it, and anyone who tried to hurt you would have to get through me first, which I promise you, they would not manage." There was no bravado in his words, just simple fact. Flora believed him. Something about this mountain man radiated a kind of calm, capable strength that made her feel, for the first time in 3 years, like she might actually survive the night. The cabin appeared suddenly in a clearing, larger than Flora expected. It was well built, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear chickens settling in for the night. Zachariah dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Again, his hands were impossibly gentle, supporting her weight without gripping or grabbing. Flora's legs buckled when her feet touched the ground. Pain shot through her, and she gasped. Without a word, Zachariah scooped her up in his arms, cradling her against his broad chest. Flora tensed, panic rising, but his hold remained careful, protective rather than possessive. "I have got you," he said simply. "Let me get you inside." He carried her into the cabin and set her down with great care on a comfortable chair near the fireplace. Flora looked around, surprised by how neat and well-kept everything was. Most bachelor cabins she had seen were filthy hovels. This place was clean, with handmade furniture and curtains on the windows. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and shelves held books and various supplies organized with military precision. Zachariah moved to light the fire, then filled a kettle with water from a pump by the sink. Flora watched him, still not quite able to believe this was real. He moved with economical efficiency, his large frame navigating the space with practiced ease. His muscles flexed beneath his buckskin shirt as he worked, and Flora found herself staring. She had grown accustomed to fearing male strength, but something about the way Zachariah carried his power felt different, controlled, deliberate. "I am going to make some willow bark tea for the pain," he said, setting the kettle on the hook over the fire. "Then I will get bandages and salve for those cuts. Is that all right with you?" Again with the asking permission. Flora nodded, her throat tight. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Zachariah turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Because you need help and I am able to give it. There is no more reason required than that. Most men would not care. Then most men are failing at basic decency." He pulled a wooden box from a shelf, opening it to reveal neat rows of medical supplies. "I spent 4 years as a field medic during the war. Saw more pain and suffering than any person should. I promised myself that if I survived, I would spend the rest of my life doing the opposite of causing harm." Flora absorbed this information, trying to reconcile this gentle giant with the violent men she had known. "Which side did you fight for?" "The Union. I am from Pennsylvania originally. Came out west after the war ended because I needed space and quiet. The mountains suit me better than cities ever did." He brought over the medical supplies and knelt beside her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers rather than looming over her. Flora realized with a start that he did everything possible to make himself less threatening, despite being the most physically imposing man she had ever encountered. "May I examine your injuries?" he asked. "I need to see what I am working with." Flora nodded again, unable to find her voice. Zachariah's examination was thorough but impersonal, his touch clinical and careful. He cleaned the cuts on her feet and hands, his large fingers surprisingly deft as he applied salve and wrapped them in clean bandages. When he saw the bruises on her arms and the ones circling her throat, his jaw clenched and his hands trembled slightly, but he said nothing, just continued his work with gentle precision. "You likely have bruised ribs as well," he said finally. "I can wrap them if you would like, but you would need to." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "I can do it myself if you have the bandages," Flora said quickly, understanding his meaning. The thought of removing her dress in front of any man, even this surprisingly kind one, made her stomach twist with anxiety. "Of course." Zachariah handed her a roll of linen. "There is a screen in the corner for privacy, and I will step outside to tend to my horse. Take your time." He left without another word, closing the door quietly behind him. Flora sat for a moment in stunned silence, then forced herself to move. Behind the screen, she peeled off her torn dress with shaking hands. Her torso was a canvas of bruises in various stages of healing, purple and yellow and green. She wrapped her ribs tightly, biting her lip against the pain, then pulled her dress back on. The kettle was whistling by the time she emerged. Zachariah came back inside carrying a bundle, which turned out to be a clean nightgown and a warm quilt. "My mother sent these when she visited last year," he explained. "Said I needed proper guest bedding even if I never had guests. Seems she was right." He poured the willow bark tea into a tin cup and handed it to Flora. She sipped it gratefully, feeling the bitter liquid soothe her aching body. The warmth spread through her, and suddenly she was exhausted beyond measure. "You should rest," Zachariah said. "You can take my bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Flora protested weakly. "You can and you will. You need proper rest to heal." His tone left no room for argument, but somehow it still did not feel domineering. Just practical. Flora was too tired to protest further. Zachariah showed her to the bedroom, which was as neat as the rest of the cabin. The bed had a real mattress, not just a straw tick, and plenty of blankets. He lit a candle on the bedside table and set a glass of water beside it. "If you need anything, just call out. I am a light sleeper." He paused at the door. "Flora, is it? I heard that man shouting your name." "Yes, Flora Kincaid." "Well, Flora Kincaid, you are safe here. I give you my word on that, and I do not give my word lightly. Sleep well." He closed the door, leaving her alone. Flora stood for a long moment, staring at the bed. Then she changed into the nightgown, which was far too big but blessedly clean and soft, and crawled under the covers. The mattress was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in years. She expected to lie awake, anxious and afraid despite Zachariah's assurances. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, her body finally allowing itself to rest now that it felt, for the first time in so long, truly safe. Flora woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, wincing as her bruised body protested. She made her way slowly to the main room, where Zachariah stood at the stove cooking breakfast. He had pulled his long hair back with a leather cord, revealing a strong profile and a fading scar along his jawline. His shirt stretched across his broad shoulders as he worked, and Flora noticed how his forearms corded with muscle as he flipped the bacon. "Good morning," he said, glancing over with a slight smile. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Flora admitted, "but better than last night. Sit. Food will be ready in a moment." Flora settled into the chair from the night before, accepting the cup of coffee Zachariah brought her. It was strong and hot, brewed better than anything Thomas had ever made. She cradled the cup in her bandaged hands, savoring the warmth. Zachariah served up 2 plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits with gravy. Flora stared at the food, her stomach growling. Thomas had rationed her meals, claiming she needed to learn economy, and she could not remember the last time she had eaten her fill. "Eat as much as you want," Zachariah said, sitting across from her. "You need to rebuild your strength." Flora ate slowly at first, then faster, unable to help herself. The food was delicious, properly seasoned and cooked. Zachariah ate his own meal in silence, not watching her but not ignoring her either. When she finished, he quietly added another biscuit to her plate without comment. After breakfast, Zachariah cleared the dishes while Flora gathered her courage. "I should go," she said finally. "I have imposed on your kindness long enough." Zachariah turned to face her, his expression serious. "Go where, Flora? Back to a man who tried to kill you? I do not know, but I cannot stay here. It would not be proper. Propriety is less important than survival." He dried his hands on a towel and came to sit across from her again. "I am not going to force you to stay, but I want you to think carefully about your options. You have no money, no shoes, no coat. You are injured. If you go back to Laramie, your husband will find you. What then?" Flora's eyes filled with tears. "I do not know what else to do. I have no family, no friends. Thomas made sure I was isolated, and even if I did leave, I am still his wife. The law would side with him. Not if you went somewhere far enough away that he could not follow." Zachariah leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Listen, I know this is sudden, and I know you have no reason to trust me, but you could stay here for a while. At least until you are healed and can figure out a real plan. I live alone and I have plenty of space. You would be safe, I promise you that." "I could not possibly stay here without some way to repay you," Flora said. "I will not be a charity case. Then help me around the place. I could use assistance with the chickens and the garden. I am a fair hand at hunting and building, but my cooking is mediocre at best, and I never was good at the domestic tasks. If you wanted to help with those things, I would consider it a fair trade for room and board." Flora studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But Zachariah's expression remained open and honest, his dark eyes steady. "You would really let me stay here, just like that, just like that. Though I confess it is not entirely selfless. I have been alone on this mountain for 8 years now. Some company would be welcome, especially company that does not try to shoot me when I offer them vegetables from my garden, which happened with the last stranger who came through." Despite everything, Flora felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Well, I promise not to shoot you." "Then we have a deal." Zachariah stood, extending his hand. Flora hesitated, then placed her smaller hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but not crushing. They shook on it, and Flora felt something shift in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the absence of constant fear. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Zachariah gave Flora space and time to heal, never pushing her, never demanding anything. He slept in the main room while she kept the bedroom, and he never once made her feel uncomfortable or threatened. Instead, he treated her with a careful respect that Flora had never experienced before. She took over the cooking, grateful to have a purpose, and surprised to find she enjoyed it. Zachariah's pantry was well stocked with basics, and his garden still had late-season vegetables. She made hearty stews and fresh bread, proper meals that brought genuine appreciation to Zachariah's face. He complimented her cooking earnestly, never taking it for granted. In return, Zachariah taught her about mountain living. He showed her how to collect eggs from the chickens without getting pecked, how to identify edible plants in the forest, how to read weather signs in the sky. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid when she made mistakes. When she accidentally let the chickens escape their coop, he simply helped her round them up, laughing at the absurdity of 2 full-grown adults chasing hens around the clearing. Flora found herself watching him as he worked, fascinated by the way he moved. Despite his size and obvious strength, Zachariah was never rough or careless. He chopped wood with powerful, precise strokes, stacked stones with careful attention to balance, handled his tools with practiced ease. Everything he did was deliberate and controlled, and Flora slowly began to understand that this control extended to how he treated her. He was holding back, she realized. All that strength, all that power, and he kept it carefully in check around her because he understood she needed gentleness. The realization made her chest ache with an emotion she could not quite name. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Flora was washing dishes when she accidentally knocked a plate off the table. It shattered on the floor with a crash that made her freeze in terror. Old instincts kicked in immediately. She dropped to her knees, frantically gathering the pieces with shaking hands even as they cut into her palms. "I am so sorry," she gasped, panic rising in her throat. "I am so sorry, I did not mean to. I will clean it up, please. I am sorry." "Flora, stop." Zachariah's voice was calm but firm. "You are cutting yourself. Stop." But Flora could not stop. Thomas had beaten her unconscious once for breaking a cup. She scrambled to pick up every shard, blood dripping from her fingers, apologies spilling from her lips in a desperate stream. Suddenly Zachariah was kneeling beside her, his large hands closing gently over hers, stilling her frantic movements. "Flora, look at me." She looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, trembling. "It is just a plate," he said softly, "just a thing made of clay. It has no value compared to you hurting yourself. I am not angry. I am not going to punish you. It was an accident. Accidents happen. Do you understand?" Flora stared at him, unable to process his words. No anger, no violence, just concern for her well-being. "Let me see your hands," Zachariah said, his tone infinitely gentle. When she hesitated, he added, "Please." She opened her hands, revealing the cuts from the broken ceramic. Zachariah made a soft sound of distress and carefully helped her to her feet, leading her to the chair. He cleaned up the broken plate himself, then brought over his medical kit and tended to her hands with the same gentle care he had shown that first night. "I am sorry," Flora whispered again. "I should have been more careful." "Flora." Zachariah waited until she met his eyes. "You do not need to apologize for accidents. You do not need to apologize for taking up space or making noise or needing things. You are a person, not a possession. You have value beyond your usefulness. I need you to start believing that." His words broke something open inside her. Flora started to cry, really cry, in a way she had not allowed herself to do in years. Zachariah did not try to stop her or tell her to calm down. He just pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it into her hand, then sat quietly nearby, giving her space to feel everything she had been holding back. When the storm of tears finally passed, Flora felt hollowed out but somehow lighter. Zachariah brought her a cup of tea and sat down across from her. "My pa was a violent drunk," he said quietly. "Beat my mother and my sisters until I got big enough to stop him. I was about 14 when I finally stood up to him, and he never raised a hand to any of us again. But I never forgot how they flinched at sudden movements, how they apologized for everything, how they made themselves small and quiet trying to avoid his rage. I see the same things in you, Flora, and it makes me angry. Not at you," he added quickly. "At the man who made you feel this way." Flora wiped her eyes. "How did you stop him?" "I broke his arm when he tried to hit my youngest sister, told him if he ever touched any of us again, I would do worse. I was already bigger than him by then and strong from farm work. He knew I meant it." Zachariah looked down at his large hands. "I hated using violence, even then. But sometimes it is necessary to protect people who cannot protect themselves. Do you think Thomas will come looking for me?" The question had haunted Flora since that first night. "I think he might. Men like him do not like losing control of what they consider theirs." "But Flora, I meant what I said. To get to you, he would have to go through me, and I promise you that will not happen." The certainty in his voice made Flora believe him. She nodded slowly, feeling some of the constant tension in her shoulders ease. As September turned to October, the aspens on the mountainside blazed gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter. Flora's bruises faded, her cuts healed, and slowly, carefully, she began to feel like herself again. Or perhaps like a self she had never had the chance to be. Zachariah continued to treat her with unfailing kindness and respect. He never entered a room without announcing himself first. He never touched her without asking permission. He gave her privacy and space, but also companionship when she wanted it. They fell into comfortable conversations over meals, talking about everything and nothing. Zachariah told her about his experiences in the war, his years in the mountains, his plans for expanding the cabin before winter. Flora shared carefully edited stories from her childhood before Thomas, when life had been simpler. She found herself laughing more, genuine laughter that felt rusty from disuse. Zachariah had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and he seemed to delight in making her smile. Once, when she laughed particularly hard at one of his stories about a stubborn mule he had owned, he stopped talking and just looked at her with such warmth that it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. I just like hearing you laugh." "You should do it more often." The simple statement made Flora's cheeks warm. She ducked her head, but could not quite suppress her smile. It was in those moments that Flora began to realize her feelings were changing. When Zachariah came in from chopping wood, she found herself watching the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt. When he sat across from her at meals, She noticed the warmth in his eyes and the gentleness of his smile. When their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same bowl, she felt a jolt of something that was definitely not fear. The realization terrified her. She was still married, still legally bound to Thomas. And more than that, the idea of trusting any man with her heart after what she had endured seemed impossible. Yet somehow, day by day, Zachariah was proving that not all men were like her husband, that gentleness and strength could coexist, that she could be treasured instead of tormented. One evening in late October, Flora was preparing dinner when Zachariah came in from hunting empty-handed. He looked troubled, his jaw tight. "What is wrong?" Flora asked immediately. "Someone has been on the mountain. I found tracks near the southern trail leading this way." "Fresh tracks, probably from this morning." Flora's stomach dropped. "Thomas, maybe, I cannot be certain yet, but I want you to stay inside tomorrow while I scout around. If it is him, I will handle it." "What if he has a gun? What if he hurts you?" Zachariah crossed to where she stood, stopping a respectful distance away. "Flora, I fought in a war. I have faced men trying to kill me before. I can handle myself. I do not want you to get hurt because of me." The words came out fierce, surprising both of them with their intensity. Zachariah's expression softened. "Nothing is going to happen to me, and nothing is going to happen to you. Trust me." Flora did trust him, she realized, completely. The knowledge should have frightened her, but instead it felt like relief. The next morning, Zachariah left at dawn, his rifle in hand and his hunting knife strapped to his belt. Flora tried to keep busy with household tasks, but her hands shook as she worked. Every sound outside made her jump, her heart racing with fear that Thomas would appear. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Flora had just started to prepare lunch when she heard voices outside. Male voices, one of them unmistakably Thomas's, raised in anger. She froze, terror flooding through her. "I know she is in there," Thomas shouted. "That is my wife, and you have no right to keep her from me. She is not going anywhere with you." Zachariah's voice was calm but implacable. "Go home." "The hell I will, Flora. Get out here right now." Flora's body moved on instinct, years of conditioning making her move toward the door before her conscious mind could stop her. But then she heard Zachariah speak again, his tone harder than she had ever heard it. "Take one more step toward this cabin, and it will be the last step you ever take." "You threatening me? I will have the law on you for kidnapping. No court will side with you once they see what you did to her. I am a trained field medic, and I documented every injury, every bruise, every cut, every broken rib. Try to take this to the law, and I will ensure everyone in Wyoming territory knows exactly what kind of man you are." There was a long silence. Flora crept to the window, peeking through the curtain. Thomas stood in the clearing, swaying slightly. Even from a distance, she could smell the whiskey. Zachariah stood between him and the cabin, his rifle held ready but not aimed. Two other men flanked Thomas, both looking uncomfortable. "She is my wife," Thomas said again, but his voice had lost some of its fury. "She was your victim. There is a difference. You have two choices. You can leave now and never come back, or I can make sure you face justice for attempted murder. I heard the gunshot that night, Thomas Kincaid. Half of Laramie probably did too, and I am willing to testify about what I found when I brought Flora here. So what will it be?" Thomas seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him. "You cannot keep her forever. That is her choice to make, not mine and certainly not yours. Now get off my property before I lose my patience." One of the other men, an older rancher Flora vaguely recognized, put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Come on, Tom. Let it go. She is gone." Thomas spat on the ground, then turned and stumbled back toward the horses. The three men mounted up and rode away. Thomas casting one last venomous look at the cabin. Flora watched them disappear down the trail, her whole body shaking. Zachariah stayed outside for several more minutes, making sure they were truly gone. When he finally came inside, Flora was standing in the middle of the room, tears streaming down her face. "He is gone," Zachariah said gently, "and he will not be back. I made sure of it. You could have been killed." Flora's voice broke. "He could have shot you. He is a coward who only feels powerful when terrorizing someone smaller and weaker. Men like that do not have the courage to face someone who can fight back." Zachariah set his rifle aside and took a cautious step closer. "Are you all right?" Flora shook her head, unable to speak. She was not all right. She was terrified and relieved and overwhelmed by emotions she could not begin to name. Her legs gave out, and suddenly Zachariah was there, catching her before she hit the floor. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the chair and settling her into it with infinite care. "Breathe," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "You are safe. I have got you." Those words broke through her panic. "I have got you." Flora looked at this mountain man who had protected her, cared for her, treated her with a gentleness she had never known existed. This man who had held her like she was made of glass when she felt completely shattered, giving her time and space to heal, to become strong again. "Zachariah," she whispered, "I am right here. I do not want to be Thomas's wife anymore. I want—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "What do you want, Flora?" His eyes searched hers, warm and patient. "I want to feel safe. I want to laugh without fear. I want to wake up without wondering if today will be the day I die." She drew in a shaking breath. "I want to stay here with you if you will have me." Zachariah was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His grip was gentle, his thumb brushing over her knuckles with the lightest touch. "You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay. But Flora, I need you to understand something. My feelings for you have become more than just wanting to help someone in need. I care about you. I think about you constantly. I find myself looking for excuses to make you smile. And I need you to know that, so you can decide if you want to stay anyway." Flora's heart hammered in her chest. "You care about me, very much. But I will never pressure you or expect anything from you. Your safety and happiness are what matter. If you want to stay here as my friend and nothing more, that is enough for me. I just needed to be honest with you." Flora thought about the past 2 months, the way Zachariah had treated her with unfailing kindness, the way he made her feel valued and respected, the way her heart lifted when he smiled at her, the way she had started to imagine a future that did not include running or hiding or living in fear. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "It frightens me after everything, but I do." Zachariah's face lit up with such genuine joy that it made Flora's breath catch. "You do?" "Yes. You have shown me what kindness looks like, what respect looks like. You held me together when I was falling apart, but you did it so gently that I could heal. I have never felt cared for the way you care for me. You deserve to be cared for, Flora. You deserve gentleness and patience and love." He squeezed her hand softly. "I know you are still healing, and I know trust is hard. I am willing to wait as long as you need. There is no rush." Flora felt tears well up again, but this time they were different. Not tears of pain or fear, but of hope, of possibility. She squeezed Zachariah's hand back, marveling at how safe she felt with him. This man who could snap her in half without effort, who radiated strength and power, but who chose gentleness every single time. Winter came to the Wyoming mountains with fierce determination. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the landscape into a wonderland of white. Flora had worried about being trapped in the cabin during the long winter months, but with Zachariah, Isolation felt like intimacy rather than imprisonment. They spent the short days working together on various tasks. Zachariah taught Flora how to repair tools, how to tan leather, how to whittle useful items from wood. She taught him how to make preserves from the last of the garden vegetables, how to sew torn clothing properly, how to make the cabin feel like a real home rather than just a shelter. The long evenings they spent by the fire, talking or reading from Zachariah's small collection of books. Sometimes he would tell her stories about the war, carefully edited to leave out the worst parts, or about his childhood in Pennsylvania. Flora found herself sharing more of her own past, both the good parts before Thomas and the difficult parts during. Zachariah listened to everything with patient attention, never judging, never interrupting. As the weeks passed, Flora found herself sitting closer to Zachariah during their evening conversations. Their hands would brush more often, and neither would pull away. Once, during a particularly fierce blizzard, Flora had been unable to hide her fear of the howling wind. Zachariah had opened his arms in silent offer, and after a moment's hesitation, she had curled against his side. He had held her close but not tight, his warmth and steadiness chasing away her anxiety. She had fallen asleep there and woken the next morning in her bed. Tucked under blankets with no memory of being carried, Christmas approached, and Flora decided she wanted to do something special. Using fabric from an old dress and thread from Zachariah's supplies, she spent her spare moments secretly sewing him a new shirt. The work was slow and careful, but she wanted it to be perfect. On Christmas morning, she presented it to him shyly. Zachariah unwrapped the parcel with careful hands, and when he saw what was inside, his eyes went suspiciously bright. "Flora, this is beautiful. You made this for me. I wanted to thank you for everything you have done." Zachariah stood and pulled the shirt on over his undershirt. It fit perfectly, the blue fabric bringing out the depths in his dark eyes. "It is the finest gift anyone has ever given me." "I doubt that," Flora said, laughing, but her laughter faded when she saw how serious he looked. "I mean it. You put time and care into making something just for me. That means more than you know." He paused, then reached into his pocket. "I have something for you too. It is not as fine as what you made, but I hope you will like it." He pulled out a small carved wooden box and handed it to her. Flora opened it carefully, gasping at what was inside. A delicate necklace made of small carved beads, each one a different animal. A horse, a deer, a bird, a rabbit. "You made this," Flora breathed, touching the tiny carvings with wonder. "I have been working on it since October. Each bead is an animal I have seen you admire. I thought you might like something beautiful to keep." Flora's eyes filled with tears. The gift was so thoughtful, so personal. She looked up at Zachariah, this gentle giant who had changed her life in every possible way, and felt her heart overflow. "Will you help me put it on?" she asked softly. Zachariah moved behind her, his large fingers carefully fastening the delicate clasp. His hands lingered on her shoulders for just a moment, his touch feather light. Flora reached up and covered his hands with hers, holding them in place. "Zachariah," she whispered, "I want you to hold me." "Really hold me, not like I will break." She felt him tense. "Flora, are you sure?" "I am sure. I trust you. I want to feel your strength, not just your gentleness." Slowly, carefully, Zachariah wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his broad chest. His hold was firm now, secure, his arms solid bands of warmth. Flora melted into him, feeling safe and protected and cherished all at once. His heart beat steady against her back, his breath stirred her hair. "Like this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Flora breathed. "Exactly like this." They stood that way for a long time, wrapped in each other and the peace of the snowy morning. Flora realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped just surviving and started actually living. She had gone from a woman who flinched at every sound to someone who could ask for what she wanted, who could trust another person with her heart. When they finally separated, Zachariah turned her gently to face him. His eyes searched hers, full of question and hope. "Flora, may I kiss you?" Her heart hammered, but not with fear, with anticipation. "Yes." Zachariah cupped her face in his large hands with exquisite gentleness, then lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, asking rather than demanding. Flora kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Zachariah said simply. "I have loved you for months now. You are the strongest, bravest person I have ever known, and I would be honored to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." Flora's tears spilled over, but she was smiling. "I love you too. You taught me what love is supposed to feel like, safe, gentle, strong. Then will you stay with me? Not as a guest, but as my partner, my wife if you want that. I know you are still technically married to him, but we could go somewhere far from here and start fresh. I will spend every day making sure you never regret choosing me." Flora thought about her choices. She could try to go back to some semblance of her old life, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid. Or she could embrace this new life, this new love, this man who had held her like glass until she felt strong enough to stand on her own. It was not really a choice at all. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes to all of it. I want to build a life with you, Zachariah. I want to wake up every morning knowing I am safe and loved. I want to grow old on this mountain with you." Zachariah's joy was incandescent. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around, and Flora laughed with pure delight. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. They spent the rest of Christmas Day together, cooking a special meal and exchanging small gifts and stolen kisses. That night, Flora did not go to the bedroom alone. She took Zachariah's hand and led him with her, and they held each other close under the quilts, talking softly about their plans for the future, until they both drifted off to sleep. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came the season for new beginnings. In March, Zachariah took Flora to a small settlement 3 days' ride away, far enough from Laramie that no one would question their story. They told people they were already married, that Zachariah's wife was finally joining him after living back east. No one doubted them. Flora wore a simple gold band that Zachariah had made himself, and she treasured it more than any expensive ring. They found a traveling preacher who agreed to perform a blessing ceremony for them, unaware they were not legally married in the eyes of the law. Flora did not care about the legalities. In her heart, in every way that mattered, she and Zachariah were bound together. She wore his ring, bore his name, and loved him with everything she had. Spring bloomed across the mountain, and Flora bloomed with it. She had gained weight, filling out the gaunt hollows in her cheeks and body. She moved with confidence instead of fear, laughed freely, spoke her mind. Zachariah watched her transformation with obvious pride and adoration. They worked side by side that spring, expanding the garden, repairing the barn, preparing for the coming seasons. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Zachariah had built, watching the sun set over the mountains while planning their future. "I want to have children," Flora said one evening. "Is that something you want too?" Zachariah pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I would love nothing more than to have a family with you, as many children as you want." "I used to be so afraid of the idea," Flora admitted. "Thomas wanted children, but the thought of bringing a baby into that situation terrified me. But with you, I feel differently. I want to create life with you, raise children who know what real love looks like. They will be lucky to have you as their mother. You are going to be amazing." Flora tilted her face up for a kiss, which Zachariah gladly provided. Their relationship had deepened over the winter months, becoming not just emotional but physical as well. Zachariah approached their intimacy with the same careful attention he brought to everything else, always making sure Flora felt safe and cherished. He taught her that physical love could be tender and mutual, that her pleasure mattered as much as his, that she had agency over her own body. By summer, Flora's monthly courses had stopped, and she knew. The knowledge filled her with joy and only a small thread of anxiety. She told Zachariah one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he was out of his chair and on his knees beside her, his hands covering hers on the table. "Really? You are sure?" "As sure as I can be. My body feels different. I think it happened sometime in May." Zachariah let out a whoop of joy and gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of her middle even though nothing showed yet. "We are going to have a baby. Flora, my love, you have made me the happiest man alive." His reaction soothed Flora's remaining fears. She leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady strength of him, and knew their child would be loved beyond measure. The pregnancy progressed well. Zachariah was attentive without being overbearing, taking on more of the physical labor while still letting Flora do what she felt capable of. He read everything in his medical books about childbirth, preparing himself to help deliver the baby when the time came. The nearest doctor was too far away to reach if labor came on suddenly, so Zachariah wanted to be ready. Flora's body changed, her belly swelling with new life. She felt beautiful for the first time in years, especially when she saw how Zachariah looked at her, his eyes full of wonder and love. He would spend evenings with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, talking to the child about all the things they would do together. "Boy or girl, I do not care," he told Flora one night. "As long as you both are healthy, that is all that matters." "I think it is a boy," Flora said. "I do not know why, I just feel it." She was right. In late January of 1877, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the following day, Flora gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Zachariah was with her every moment, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her through the pain. When the baby finally arrived, crying lustily, Zachariah cut the cord with shaking hands and placed their son on Flora's chest. "He is perfect," Zachariah breathed, his eyes wet with tears. "Flora, you are so strong. I am in awe of you." Flora cradled her son, overcome with love so fierce it almost hurt. This tiny person, this perfect combination of her and Zachariah, this life they had created together. She had never imagined she could feel so complete. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything. Now, looking at their son's small face, Zachariah said, "What about Samuel? It was my grandfather's name. He was a good man, strong and kind." "Samuel Larkin," Flora tested the name. "I like it." "Welcome to the world, Samuel." Their son grew strong and healthy, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn spirit. Zachariah was a devoted father, tender and patient with the baby, changing diapers and walking the floor during sleepless nights without complaint. Flora watched him cradle Samuel in his large arms, singing off key lullabies, and fell even more in love with her husband. Life settled into a new rhythm, shaped around their growing family. Flora had never been happier. She had gone from a woman who flinched at shadows to a mother who sang while she worked, who laughed daily, who felt beautiful and valued and loved. Sometimes she would think about her old life, about Thomas and the hell she had escaped. She occasionally wondered what had become of him, whether he was still in Laramie, whether he ever thought about her. But mostly, she did not think about him at all. That part of her life felt like a nightmare that had finally ended, leaving her free to live in the dream of her new reality. When Samuel was 6 months old, Zachariah took Flora into town for supplies. It was her first trip away from the mountain since they had settled there, and she felt nervous about being around so many people. But Zachariah kept her close, his hand always at her back or holding hers, and she felt safe. They were loading supplies into their wagon when Flora heard a familiar voice. Her blood turned to ice. She looked up to see Thomas across the street, stumbling drunk out of a saloon. He looked worse than she remembered, gaunt and dirty, his eyes sunken. Zachariah noticed immediately where she was looking. He moved to stand between Flora and Thomas, blocking her from view. "Get in the wagon," he said quietly. "Take Samuel and get in the wagon." Flora obeyed, climbing into the wagon seat and pulling the baby close. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to stay calm. Samuel fussed, picking up on her tension, and she soothed him with gentle murmurs. Thomas had spotted them. He crossed the street with an unsteady gait, his face twisted with anger and something that might have been grief. "Flora," he called out. "Flora, is that you?" Zachariah did not move from his protective stance. "Walk away, Thomas. You do not want to do this." "That is my wife. You stole my wife." Thomas was drawing attention now, people stopping to watch the confrontation. "She was never yours. She is her own person, and she chose to leave you because you treated her like property instead of a human being." Zachariah's voice was calm but carried clearly. "Now walk away before this ends badly for you." Thomas tried to push past Zachariah, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Zachariah caught his wrist easily, his grip tight enough to make Thomas wince. "I warned you," Zachariah said quietly. "Touch me again, threaten my family again, and I will break more than your wrist." "Do you understand?" For a moment, Thomas struggled. Then he seemed to recognize the futility of fighting someone twice his size and strength. He sagged, the fight draining out of him as suddenly as it had appeared. "She was my wife," he said again, but this time it sounded more like a plea. "She was your victim. There is a difference. Now go sleep it off before you do something you will regret." Thomas looked past Zachariah to where Flora sat in the wagon holding their baby. His eyes widened when he saw Samuel. "You have a child, with him?" "Yes," Flora said, finding her voice. It did not shake, she realized with surprise. "I have a child and a husband who loves us both. I have a life now, Thomas. A real life, not the nightmare you made for me. And I am not sorry I left." Something in Thomas's face crumpled. He looked at her for a long moment, and Flora saw the reality of what he had lost dawn on him. Then he turned and walked away without another word, disappearing back into the saloon. Zachariah climbed into the wagon beside Flora, taking Samuel so she could grip the seat with shaking hands. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I am not afraid anymore," Flora said, surprised to realize it was true. "I was for a moment. But then I looked at you and Samuel, and I knew nothing he could do would ever reach me again. I am protected. I am loved. I am free." Zachariah kissed her softly, mindful of their audience but unable to resist. "You are all of those things and more. Let us go home." They rode back to the mountain, and Flora did not look back. That chapter of her life was truly closed now. She had faced her demon and found he had no power over her anymore. The years passed peacefully on the mountain. Samuel grew into a sturdy, sweet-natured boy with his father's strength and his mother's resilience. When he was 3, Flora gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, named not for Flora's ex-husband but for Zachariah's brother who had died in the war. Their cabin expanded as their family grew. Zachariah adding rooms with careful craftsmanship. Flora kept a garden that was the envy of their few neighbors, and she had become skilled at preserving food for the long winters. She also discovered a talent for healing, learning from Zachariah's medical books and adding her own knowledge of herbs. Local families would sometimes make the trek up the mountain to seek her help with ailments and injuries. Flora had become known in the area as the kind woman on the mountain who would help anyone who needed it. She found deep satisfaction in easing others' pain, in using her knowledge to make a difference. Zachariah supported her fully, proud of the woman she had become. On their 10th anniversary, Zachariah surprised Flora with a trip just the two of them, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor couple. They rode to a beautiful meadow he had found years ago, where wildflowers bloomed in endless profusion, and a clear stream burbled through the grass. They spent the day talking, laughing, making love under the open sky with a freedom they rarely had with 3 young children at home. As the sun began to set, Zachariah pulled Flora close, both of them lying in the flowers watching clouds drift by. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying with me, building this life." Flora turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every possible way. His hair was longer now, threaded with the first hints of silver. His face bore more lines from years of sun and wind, but his eyes were still as warm and kind as they had been that first night. His body remained powerful, all muscles and strength that he used to protect and provide for his family. "Never," she said firmly. "You gave me everything, Zachariah. You gave me safety when I was in danger. You gave me gentleness when I had only known cruelty. You held me like I was made of glass until I felt strong enough to stand on my own. And then you stood beside me as an equal partner. You gave me love and children and a home. You gave me myself back." Zachariah's eyes grew bright. "You did the same for me, you know. I was just existing up on that mountain, getting through the days. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build a future instead of just surviving in the present. You taught me that the gentleness I tried to show the world was not weakness but strength. You made me a better man." "We made each other better," Flora said, kissing him softly. "That is what love is supposed to do." They rode back to the cabin as stars began to appear, arriving to find their 3 children still awake and excited to see them. Samuel, now 10 years old, had kept his siblings entertained and out of trouble. Rose, 7, threw herself at Flora with dramatic declarations of how much she had been missed. Thomas, 5, simply tucked himself against Zachariah's side, content just to have his father back. Flora looked around at her family, at the home they had built, at the life she had created from the ashes of her old one, and felt complete. She had survived hell and found heaven on the other side. She had been broken and been healed. She had been weak and become strong. And through it all, Zachariah had been there, holding her with exactly the amount of gentleness or strength she needed in any given moment. He had been her shelter in the storm, her rock in the chaos, her safe harbor when she needed refuge. But he had also been her partner in building something beautiful, her equal in creating a family, her companion in living a life worth living. That night, after the children were asleep, Flora and Zachariah sat on their porch watching the moon rise over the mountains. Zachariah's arm was around her shoulders, holding her close. Flora leaned into him, feeling his warmth and strength, and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" Zachariah asked, kissing the top of her head. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am, how much I love you." "I love you too. More than I have words to express." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. Flora thought about the terrified woman who had run into the night 11 years ago and the confident woman she was now. The transformation felt miraculous, but she knew it was not magic. It was the result of time, patience, gentle care, and true love. She had never been held with gentleness before Zachariah. She had never known that strength could be tender, that power could be protective, that love could heal wounds she had thought were permanent. He had held her like glass when she was shattered, careful and reverent, until she felt strong enough to put herself back together. And then he had continued to hold her, not because she needed it to survive, but because they both wanted it, because their lives were better intertwined than separate. The years continued to roll by, bringing their share of challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters that tested their resourcefulness, illnesses that required all of Flora's healing skills, accidents that reminded them how fragile life could be. But through everything, they faced it together, their love deepening with each shared experience. Samuel grew into a young man much like his father, strong and gentle and fiercely protective of those he loved. He eventually married a girl from town and built his own cabin nearby, wanting to stay close to his parents. Rose became a skilled herbalist under Flora's tutelage, with dreams of eventually becoming a real doctor if she could find a way to get the education. Thomas took after his father's craftsmanship, showing a natural talent for building and creating with his hands. Flora and Zachariah watched their children grow with pride, knowing they had broken the cycle of violence and created something good. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing only love and safety, never experiencing the kind of fear Flora had once lived with daily. On Flora's 50th birthday, the whole family gathered at the cabin for a celebration. There were now 5 grandchildren running around, filling the house with noise and laughter. Flora stood at her kitchen window watching Zachariah teach the oldest grandson how to properly stack firewood, his movements still strong and sure despite his years. Rose came up beside her mother, putting an arm around her waist. "Happy birthday, Mama. Are you happy?" Flora turned to look at her daughter, this bright, confident young woman who had never known anything but love. "I am more than happy, sweetheart. I am blessed beyond measure. I am glad. You deserve it after everything you went through." Flora had told her children the truth about their past when they were old enough to understand. She had not wanted them to grow up with secrets, and she wanted them to appreciate what they had. The stories of her life with Thomas had made Samuel fiercely protective of any woman he encountered who seemed afraid, and had made Rose determined to help women in bad situations find their way out. "Your father saved my life," Flora said, watching Zachariah laugh at something the grandson said. "But more than that, he gave me a life worth saving. He showed me what I deserved, and then he spent every day making sure I received it." The party went late into the evening, full of food and music and storytelling. When the last guests had finally left and the house was quiet again, Flora and Zachariah sat together in their favorite spot on the porch. Flora's body ached with age now, her hair more silver than brown, her hands gnarled from years of work. But Zachariah still held her with the same reverent gentleness he had shown that first night, as if she were precious beyond measure. 50 years old, Flora mused, half a century, and I have spent the best part of it with you. Only the last 25 years or so, Zachariah pointed out. But I plan to spend however many we have left exactly the same way. Growing old with you is a gift I never thought I would receive. When I ran into those mountains that night, I thought I was running toward death. Instead, I ran toward life." Zachariah pulled her closer, his arm still strong despite his age. "You ran toward freedom. I was just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time to help you claim it. You were more than luck. You were a miracle." Flora tilted her face up for a kiss, which Zachariah gladly provided. After 25 years of marriage, Their kisses still held the same sweetness, the same promise, the same love. They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from broken pieces. Flora thought about the journey that had brought her here, from terrified victim to beloved wife and mother, from broken to whole, from weak to strong. She had never been held with gentleness before Zachariah. But from that first night, he had shown her what true strength looked like. Not the strength that dominated and controlled, but the strength that protected and uplifted. The strength that could be gentle without being weak, that could be fierce without being cruel. He had held her like glass when she was shattered, but he had never treated her as fragile. He had given her space to heal, time to grow strong, support when she needed it, and independence when she wanted it. He had been exactly what she needed, exactly when she needed it, and in return, Flora had given him her heart, her trust, her love. She had built a life with him that honored both of their strengths, that celebrated both of their contributions. She had given him children and a home and a partnership that enriched them both. As the years passed into their 60s and 70s, Flora and Zachariah slowed down but never stopped living fully. They still worked their garden, though Samuel had taken over the heavier labor. They still welcomed visitors, though Flora's healing practice was now shared with Rose. They still sat on their porch every evening, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Zachariah's hair went fully white, and his body finally began to show the wear of decades of hard mountain living. Flora's joints ached more with each passing year, and her eyesight dimmed. But their love never wavered, never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their entire extended family gathered once again. There were now 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, a legacy of love and life that Flora and Zachariah had created together. As Flora looked around at all the faces, seeing pieces of herself and Zachariah reflected in each generation, she felt overwhelming gratitude. That night, lying in bed beside Zachariah, both of them tired but content from the day's celebrations, Flora took his hand in hers. His palm was as calloused as ever, his grip still steady and sure. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me. For holding me gently when I needed it, and holding me firmly when I needed that instead. For always knowing what I needed, sometimes before I knew it myself." Zachariah turned to face her in the darkness, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with the same tender care he had always shown. "You never have to thank me for loving you, Flora. It has been the greatest privilege of my life. You are the strongest person I have ever known, and watching you bloom from the frightened woman who ran into those mountains into the confident, capable, amazing woman you are now has been my life's greatest joy. I could not have done it without you. Maybe not. But I could not have become the man I am without you either. We shaped each other, my love. We built each other up, healed each other's wounds, brought out the best in each other. That is what real love does." Flora moved closer, tucking herself against Zachariah's solid warmth, and he wrapped his arms around her just like he had thousands of times before. She felt safe, cherished, loved beyond measure. She had survived hell and found heaven, had been broken and been made whole, had been lost and been found. And through it all, Zachariah had been her constant, her rock, her home. He had held her like glass until she felt strong, and then he had continued to hold her, not because she needed it to survive, but because they both chose it, because their lives were immeasurably better together. As Flora drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, she knew with absolute certainty that she had been blessed. She had found her happy ending, had lived her happily ever after. And tomorrow, she would wake up and do it all again, growing old with the man who had taught her what love really meant. The mountain wind whispered through the pines outside, a familiar lullaby that had accompanied Flora for decades now. Inside the cabin, two people who had found each other in darkness slept peacefully, their hearts beating in synchronized rhythm, their love as strong and steady as the mountains themselves. Flora had run into the wilderness expecting to die, and instead, she had learned to truly live. She had been held with gentleness when she had known only cruelty, had been treasured when she had known only torment, had been loved when she had known only fear. And in Zachariah's arms, she had found not just safety but home, not just survival but joy, not just existence, but life in all its beautiful, messy, wonderful fullness. Their story was not one of a man saving a helpless woman, but of two people finding each other and choosing, every single day, to build something beautiful together. It was a story of healing and hope, of gentleness and strength, of broken pieces made whole through love and time and patient care. It was, simply put, a love story. And it was theirs.